So how do you get from a microscopic fungus in Ireland to the creation of modern Canada? Sounds like a stretch, right? But it's an unbelievable story of incredible tragedy, but also one of just amazing resilience, where a disaster on one side of the Atlantic really became the cornerstone for a new nation on the other.
Seriously, how could a potato fungus help build a country? It seems impossible. But this link, it's one of history's most powerful and, honestly, most overlooked chain reactions. And to understand it, we have to start with a period of just unimaginable suffering.
Okay, so to really get why millions would make this harrowing journey to Canada, we first have to understand the sheer desperation that forced them from their homes. Our story starts in mid-19th century Ireland, a nation that was, believe me, on the absolute brink of collapse.
So what was the culprit? It was a fungus called late blight. Now you have to realize, in the 1840s, the potato wasn't just a food source in Ireland. For nearly half the population, it was the only food source. So when this blight struck, it wasn't just a failed crop. It was the complete annihilation of the food supply for millions. Just gone.
The devastation was swift, and it was relentless. It took only 2 years to go from the first crop failures to what became known as Black 47. That was a year of such catastrophic loss, it triggered a desperate exodus. In that single year, over 100,000 people fled to British North America alone.
The human cost is just staggering to think about. Ireland's population, which was once over 8 million, was just decimated. Through starvation, disease, and this massive wave of emigration, the country lost roughly 6 million people in the decades that followed. Its population became just a fraction of what it was. This wasn't a crisis, it was a demographic catastrophe.
And, this reveals the political side of the tragedy. While the blight was a natural disaster, the official response was a catastrophic failure of policy. This quote from the British Prime Minister says it all. He's focused on market economics, keeping prices down, not on direct aid to starving people. That decision just compounded the suffering and left millions with only one real option: escape.
For those who could somehow scrape together the fare, their only hope lay across the ocean. But escaping the famine was only the first trial. The journey itself, well, it was a life-or-death gamble.
The conditions on these ships were just appalling. There were cargo vessels, never intended for people. Passengers were crammed into dark, airless holds, with barely any food or water, a perfect breeding ground for typhus and cholera. The name they earned, coffin ships, was tragically, horribly accurate. An estimated 20,000 people died during the crossing itself. Think about that. They had survived starvation in Ireland, only to perish from disease at sea before they ever even saw the shores of their new world.
And even for those who survived the journey, the ordeal was not over. They arrived at quarantine stations like Grosse Ile in Quebec. And these numbers, from just this one station, they show the grim reality. Of the hundreds of thousands processed, over 14,000 were immediately sent to the hospital, and thousands more died from fever and dysentery right there at the gateway to their new life.
But this is where the story turns. For the hundreds of thousands who did survive, their arrival would change British North America forever. They weren't just refugees, they became the very engine that would build a new country from the ground up. You see, the colonies were expanding, and they desperately needed people to do the hard, dangerous work of building a nation. The sudden arrival of all these Irish migrants provided a massive, ready-made labor force, fueling an unprecedented boom in construction. This continuous influx also generated crucial economic activity, which really helped stabilize the colony's finances during some very uncertain times. And their legacy is literally carved into the Canadian landscape. We're talking about nation-defining feats of engineering, things that opened up critical trade routes like the Rideau Canal, the Lachine Canal, the Victoria Bridge in Montreal. This essential infrastructure connected growing urban centers like Montreal, York, what we now call Toronto, and Hamilton. This was the absolute groundwork for the modern Canadian economy. And the scale of this work was just immense. A slackwater canal. It isn't just a big ditch. It's a complex system of locks and dams designed to tame an entire river. The Rideau Canal was one of the greatest engineering feats of its century, and it was built largely by the hands of these new arrivals. But the impact wasn't just physical. This wave of migration fundamentally reshaped the social and political fabric of the colonies. It transformed not just the cities, but also expanded the agricultural base as settlers established new farms, setting the stage for the creation of Canada itself. By 1871, that's just 4 years after Confederation, the demographic shift was undeniable.
As this chart shows, the Irish had become the single largest ethnic group in most major cities outside of Quebec. This wasn't a minor change. It was a transformation that would fundamentally shift the balance of political power. And this demographic wave had immediate political consequences. At the time, what we now call Ontario and Quebec were one entity, the province of Canada. But the system was unbalanced. Canada West's population, swelled by migrants, was now much larger, but it had the exact same number of legislative seats as the smaller Canada East. The result? Total political paralysis.
So the solution, pushed hard by politicians from the booming Canada West, was this idea of representation by population. The simple principle that more people should mean more political power. This migration-fueled demand didn't just provide labor, it fundamentally broke a political system. It was the key that unlocked the deadlock and forced leaders to the negotiating table where the framework for the nation of Canada was born.
So when we bring it all together, you can see the full arc of this history. A story that began with a potato blight in Ireland concludes with the birth of a nation and a legacy that continues to shape Canada today. In the 2021 Canadian census, over 4.4 million people, that's about 12% of the entire population, reported having Irish ancestry. The descendants of those who survived the famine in the coffin ships are woven right into the very fabric of modern Canada.
And that legacy is tangible. You can see it. The Rideau Canal, once a grueling and dangerous construction site, is now a celebrated UNESCO World Heritage Site. It stands as a living monument to the labor, the suffering, and the incredible resilience of the people who built it.
Which leaves us with a final question. This story of Irish migration to Canada, it isn't just history. It's a powerful reminder that nations are so often built on the resilience of those who arrive seeking refuge. And it forces us to ask, how do the struggles and hopes of today's migrants continue to shape the world we are building for tomorrow?